Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Farmcraft time. Woo-hoo! So glad to have you all here. We have a variety of people joining us today, and we are all crowding the screen here. So very quickly, we're going to get into Farmcraft so that we can just hang out in the world, and that's what y'all really want to see anyway. So let us start with some introductions so we know who all is with us today. My name is Claire LeBeau, and I am the Director of Communications for NASEF. And super excited that we have Farmcraft happening right now for the next couple of months. So let's see, Adam, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself next?
Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Cornish. I'm an agricultural advisor at the Department of State, which is the U.S. Foreign Affairs Agency, and I'm super excited to talk about Farmcraft with our first preseason challenge. So, why don't I pass it on over to Kathy?
Yay! Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Chow Isaacs. I'm a global Minecraft mentor, and I'm part of the Minecraft Challenge team here at NASEF. And I'm being distracted by the background sound right now.
I know, wow.
I wonder who it is.
You only get dogs and cats from my mic, so
I know.
I don't have a grandfather clock.
Yeah.
I don't either.
And it was someone on the East Coast because it was 4 o'clock.
Oh, maybe it was Adam.
Wow, good detective work.
I
was on mute.
Well, I am super excited to be here too because I love the Farmcraft. I love learning about the whole process of farming in real life and in. Okay, and I'm continuing to be distracted by
llamas.
There's a lot of llamas in our world right now. I don't know what happened.
No one else can see the screen right now.
Not yet.
It's
No,
making
not
no
yet.
sense to anyone watching the live stream. So, without further ado, let's.
All right, so I'm going to throw it somewhere. I'm going to toss it up to Lynn.
Hello, everyone. I am Adam's colleague in the U.S. Department of State, the United States Foreign Affairs Agency, as he said. I'm in the Office of American Spaces, and we have over 600 of those locations around the globe. And a shout out to anyone who is joining us from the American Spaces Network today, as well as all you Minecraft, Farmcraft players. And my home state of Maryland has a great county fair, what my county does, of which I'm a regular attendee. I don't have any llamas, but I do have 2 dogs and a cat. And I see a lot of foxes and deer coming around here in Maryland. And my sister tells me that there are coyotes in her hometown of Williamsburg, Virginia, invaders. But I also love watching the crops growing, and there's still quite a few farms in my home state. And proud of our local agriculture, and excited to be part of Farmcraft 2022.
Awesome. Thanks, Lynn. Let's see, Brian.
Hello, can we hear me? Yes.
Yep.
Cool. I'm Brian. I go by Cleverlike. I run Cleverlike Studios. We are a company that takes popular video games and creates really fun learning experiences inside of those games as a way of reaching kids where they are familiar and comfortable and motivated to be, and create experiences for them that they might not be able to experience in the real world in a meaningful way. And this group here takes that to another level by engaging in conversations and asking good questions and educating, just bringing perspective of the real world in through conversation and the use of video games, which I love being a part of. How about our special guest, Farmer Clayton? And then we'll end it with Eric because he likes to just run the show.
Wait a minute.
Thanks. I'm Clayton. I'm here from the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the Office of Pest Management Policy. I work with regulatory issues related to pesticides and pest management, but also grew up on a farm, and I was really happy to be invited to be a part of this panel and happy to chat about my background in agriculture and offer insights that might be helpful for developing this cool game. Really looks fun. Thanks.
Awesome. I'm excited for you to be here because I want to hear you talk about what you thought farming was all about when you were a kid, and then now this is like your professional career, and we get to hear kind of both sides of it. So I know we're going to dive into that. We're going to dive into that a little bit later. And then Eric.
Yeah, I am Eric Leitner. I am a STEM and computer science instructional facilitator for Broward County Public Schools. I work at the district level. I support teachers in what they do in all things STEM and computer science in the classroom. And in that role, I do want to kind of kick off all of this at the Farmcraft, knowing that we've got educators who join us via the live streams. We've got educators who make this opportunity available to their students all over the world. I know, and I know we know as a team, everything you're dealing with right now and what you're going through, or at least we are aware of it. Some things we certainly can't imagine what it's like being directly in that classroom with the students and all the obstacles that you have to overcome this school year. So one, we want to say we appreciate all that you do. We appreciate that you're bringing this opportunity to your students. We want to make it as effortless as we can for you and for your students. And we want to make it as fun for you and your students so that there's something exciting, engaging, and rewarding for you to do with your students through all of this, because I think we all deserve that right now, especially all of our educators. I went off on a little tangent there. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
No, it's true. We've talked about that. Like, we know just teaching your day-to-day classes right now, like that's a pretty big deal. And so to be adding that in, it's always a big deal, but especially through all the COVID craziness that we've had in the last couple of years. So yeah, it's awesome to have you all here. All right. So without further ado, Eric, do you want to take a second and just kind of show us what the site looks like, where we can find Farmcraft, what kinds of...
Yeah, let's do that, because there are so many places to find it now. You've made it so easy.
Oh, yes.
All right. So let me put us here. There we go.
We've got like a whole...
there.
Oh, that works much better. I was going to say, you know, we may as well have a, oh my God, I'm blanking on my old timey television shows right now, but I know you all know what I'm talking about.
Brady Bunch.
Yeah, Brady Bunch.
Oh yeah.
Right, we've got a whole Brady Bunch thing going to the point where it's covering some of our screens, so that's okay. So if you want to learn more about the program that we're doing, you want to get registered, you want your students to participate, then you are going to head to nasef.org. That's NASEF.org. And this is the homepage that you'll find. And there are several ways to find out more about Farmcraft. So first of all, you'll see that we've got the banner up here. And right now, this is one of the many Minecraft offerings. But if we scroll through those banners, you'll see that Farmcraft 2020 is now live. And if you click right on that banner, it'll take you right where you need to go. Additionally, if we click on the Learning tab at the top, we will see that NASEF Farmcraft 2022 is right there under the Learning tab. And of course, under Compete, you'll see Minecraft events. And if we go to Minecraft events, one of our Minecraft events is NASEF Farmcraft. So I feel like if you just explore for a little while on the NASEF site, you will definitely find where you need to be. But what you are looking for is NASEF Farmcraft 2022. And this is the page you want to see. And there are just a ton of resources here for you. First and foremost is the link to register your team. You will need to make an account on the NASEF website if you don't already have one. That is, of course, free to do, as is the entire program. So that is where you'll find that. You'll also find a team guide, a marketing toolkit, a education edition NASEF Farmcraft guide to using Minecraft, or a link to the YouTube channel, which some of you may be watching this live streaming on the YouTube channel right now. Our previous live streams, so all of the live streams that we are doing, including this one, that are being recorded. If you don't catch them live, this is where you can find them. And then, of course, some language resources for Minecraft Education Edition, because we know this is an international program. So all of this, so far, tons and tons of resources you can find, as well as, and we may as well announce it right now, some information on things like prizes and so on, but as well as the very first preseason challenge, which we are launching today. So this is the first chance you will have as an opportunity to play in Minecraft and kind of show us what you can do. If you participated in any of the NASEF Minecraft programs in the past, you'll know that we submit these entries through Flipgrid, which is a really fantastic program for student voice. And we'll walk through the process of submitting a little bit later in the show. But many of you who requested And by the way, when you register, you can request free licenses of Minecraft Education Edition if you don't have access to it already. But those same accounts can be used if you do the Join with Minecraft to log in to submit your entry. In addition, your coaches, your adult sponsors, should be receiving emails, and one of those emails includes a password to access that Flipgrid if you can't get in with your account alone. So either way, you will have access to that Flipgrid to submit your entries. Some of you are requesting access to the Flipgrid. That's not quite how it works. So use that password. Your teachers, your adult sponsors, and parents, adult sponsors, parents, coaches, if any of you are watching it, you should have received that in an email. And if not, I'm sure that is on its way. So we'll walk through that entire process. But this is where it is. And I'm actually going to log into it right now. I'll join with my Minecraft or my Microsoft account. I've got multiple accounts for Flipgrid. And by the way, I'm right on that NASEF website. Didn't have to leave. The Flipgrid page is embedded right here. And here we see Preseason Challenge 1. So I really quickly want to read off what the Preseason Challenge is, so that when we have our discussion today and we walk through the Minecraft world a little bit and we speak with our expert, Farmer Clayton, who's joining us, we have some ideas of what questions we should be thinking about and what kind of conversations we should be having, and of course, what research we should be doing to have a really great Preseason Challenge 1 submission. So let's take a look. It says, farmers today use several tools and practices to maintain soil health, defend their harvest against insect pests, and adequately water crops to produce the food necessary to feed them and their communities. Design a modern farm in your Minecraft world to model and demonstrate these tools and practices. Consider ways to build or present those ideas and concepts that do not exist in a typical Minecraft world. And as we know, that's a lot sometimes. Explain the content you included in your build and why you chose to include it. And then, of course, we gave you some guiding questions. Because it's always good to have these sort of guiding questions to think about when you're creating your submissions and when you're creating your entries and when you're building in the world to guide what you're doing. So what tools and practices do farmers use? The ones you know about or the ones you researched and looked up? What tools do you think would advance farming practices? So what tools maybe either don't exist or are on sort of the cutting edge of that technology that may advance what we do or what farmers do, not what I do. What are the biggest current challenges that farmers face? And what is the most surprising thing you learned about farming when preparing for this challenge? So if you're doing that research, hopefully there was one aha moment of something that we were like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. And I have a feeling we're going to learn some of that through watching just this live stream and participating in the conversation with our guests today. So that is a challenge. It was very wordy, but in a nutshell, we want you to give us information you've learned about modern farming. And what it takes to run a modern farm. And that can vary from place to place. So with that in mind, let's switch over, I think, to a Minecraft world where we've got some of our guests in it already.
Woohoo.
So who's with us in the Minecraft world?
Me.
Kathy, I had no question that you were there already. Also, is there a particular reason why you have a baked potato hovering around your feet?
You know what? Because I didn't know there was baked potato, so I had to grab one and see what that was like.
Can you plant a baked potato and grow more baked potatoes?
I don't think so. No.
Doesn't work that way. Okay.
I didn't know. I had no. When did they add the baked potato?
That is a question for
Clayton.
It's funny you should ask. You know, with gene editing, maybe all things are possible, but not grow baked potatoes.
It's funny. We talked
already
about that.
thinking, what did I get myself into?
That's right. That's right. So yeah, I see you're already, tilling some land over here for
we need
more farming and
much more space needed.
I'm going to try not and let my my OCD get the best of me. That my beautifully lined plots here are all of a sudden.
That's all right. Let it go, Eric. Let it go.
Yeah,
Look at the other
baby.
ones. Look at the other two.
That's right. They're perfect. Everything is fine. I know Clever Like is with us. He's running down this end. But we want to have this discussion, and this is kind of how we started off last season as well. And the discussion basically was what goes on in regular everyday farming practices, and how does it compare to what we're doing right here in our in our Minecraft world, right? And we're in a typical Minecraft world. There's no mods, no edits, no resource packs, no behavior packs. I just opened up an infinite world, and here we are. And admittedly, we put down some plots to farm in, but we've done nothing else than that. So there's nothing sort of unusual about this particular world that we're in right now. So let me start with the obvious questions here. I mean, we want to get to know who you are and your areas of expertise. So Clayton, if you could tell us a little bit about your background in farming, both professional and personal.
Happy to. I grew up on an apple farm in Pennsylvania, a small diversified fruit orchard. We grew fruits and vegetables, mostly sold retail. My parents later transitioned to more of an apple-only operation, but that got my interest piqued in all things farming. Obviously, growing up around that, it's your whole world. And so I learned a lot about pest management and pursued that as a career. I got a degree in entomology. Entomology is the study of insects. And so I have done research in integrated pest management and worked on tree fruits in Pennsylvania, and also then got into the regulatory space. So because farmers need pesticides, someone has to oversee proper use of that. That falls to the Environmental Protection Agency, and that's where I went. And I brought up, besides my pest management expertise, I brought sort of a background in farming. What sort of restrictions are practical for growers, what makes sense to them, what doesn't make sense to them, and not all regulatory approaches are necessarily a good fit for all types of agriculture. So that's a brief synopsis. That's where I'm coming from here. I've since moved on to USDA, but I really do similar work rather than as a regulator, providing information to EPA about what farmers need.
So a lot of background in farming is what you're saying.
Yeah, my whole life.
A whole life spent farming. I've spent very little time farming. I like to plant things in the 3x3 plot that I have. That's 3x3 feet, I should specify, in my backyard, next to the patio, and watching them just die very sadly over time, which is pretty much how farming goes around here. At my
But
house.
Eric, isn't it like that gives me an appreciation for real farmers who grow massive amounts of crops that literally feed the world? Because I do the same. I grow a little bit, but when you see, just go into the produce section of a grocery store, the variety and the fact that they grow so much, it's awesome.
Yeah, it boggles my mind. And one of the things I always wonder is the more I learn, especially after season 1. And then I learn now, and I'm sure we'll learn more through this conversation, is I'm like, how did we ever get to this point? Like, how did we ever learn all of this or realize that all of this is what it takes to sustain and feed a population? Like, how did we get here? Because it's an unbelievable amount of knowledge is needed to really run this effectively.
Knowledge and logistics, we're all interconnected. We rely on a lot of other countries for foods out of season. It's not that we have enough area to grow all those wonderful fruits and berries all winter, but we import things from Mexico and South America and Australia and the part of the world where their winter is our summer and our summer is their winter. And it's really a cool, complex system of interconnected economies.
It has to be. I can only imagine the logistics of it all. So one of the things, if we
recall the fact.
Oh, Lynn, please.
That my grandmother, who grew up in Scotland, was amazed at the availability of pineapples in the United States when she first came to the United States. Which will tell you, she was born in the late 19th century. So, what biotechnology and supply chains have done for agriculture is amazing.
I'm discouraged by the number of pineapples in the United States because I am highly allergic to pineapple.
You are?
I am.
Wow.
I know one other person. You're the second person
It's not a very common allergy, but yeah.
Oh. That makes me very sad for you.
It makes me very sad for me too, because I didn't have as much of an allergy as a child, but it developed. And actually, one of the big farms that I ever got to visit in my life and really experience what it was like to be on a massive farm that was feeding many and producing food that was going to be distributed to, not outside of its own community, were the Dole farms in Hawaii, actually, which was a great trip because it was this amazing experience, but also terrifying because they kept trying to offer me samples and I kept having to tuck my arms in no, thank you. But it was a very cool experience. But on that trip, like one of the things that we got to see, of course, were some of the tools that I admit, like I was somewhat already familiar with when it comes to farming. Because I know that's one of the questions: is what tools do farmers use, right? And we're here in our Minecraft world, and I already saw you tilling the ground with just a handheld hoe, right? Which is pretty much how Minecraft works. We don't have heavy machinery in a kind of typical Minecraft world for farming, although there are some ways with code or with redstone to automate things. And I've seen some really impressive ways to do that in a Minecraft world, although I don't know how much they relate to what we see in the real world. And while there are the typical tools like these, what do you think are like some of the tools that no one ever realizes are a farming tool, either because they don't associate it with farming, or it's just some tool that we, as the general public, aren't aware exists and is so necessary for farming? Because I kept thinking that, like, as I was looking up lists of farming tools, I'd be like, yeah, I know what that is, or I've seen that. And then one or two, I was like, that's a little unusual, but I get what it does. Are there any that like would surprise us that if our students were going to research modern farming tools, maybe they should look it up?
Have you ever heard of flamers?
What are those?
No.
No.
Look them up right now.
So in a lot of organic cropping systems where they're not allowed to use herbicides, you can have rigs that will, you can drive over a field and flame weeds, literally burn them off. Also in alfalfa, it can be done in the spring to burn alfalfa weevils, because the little bit of residue that you're burning off in the spring won't matter. It's going to grow new growth. And so it's also useful in the conventional space because there are situations where weeds become resistant to herbicides or insects become resistant to insecticides. And so sometimes we fall back on some really cool physical control tactics for pests.
There you go. I built what I think it is, even though I'm sure this is completely and utterly inaccurate.
Actually, yeah. Picture a boom sprayer, but instead of spraying chemicals to the ground, it shoots flames like blue flames.
That's
so that crazy. See, that immediately gets my mind in like, okay, well, that's the tool. What's the process? Like, how do you stop that from just burning everything, or spreading amongst all your crops, or spreading out into the environment around your crops?
Well, time and place, right? You're doing that when it's cold and wet early in the season. You're certainly not going to do that to a field of hay that's about to be harvested.
That would make perfect sense. Yeah, if I see those big hay bales on the side of the road, that's probably not the time to start lighting fires.
Those can actually spontaneously combust. Did you know that?
I didn't know about the hay bales. I knew about composting.
Wow.
I didn't know about those.
Yeah, well, it's a similar process to the composting. If you have too high moisture content, you can get certain anaerobic metabolism going on in those big bales and develop methane, and it also develops heat. So actually farmers have to be really careful about the moisture content as they bale their hay. That's why you dry it down to a certain percentage.
Wow.
See, and my brain would think it would be almost the opposite. If it was like too dry, then it's right. But it's the moisture, I guess, creates a breeding ground for certain bacteria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They produce. I love this. This is
right.
This is laugh. I don't know what I'm allowed to say or not.
Well,
so I'm thinking like a 12-year-old.
Can you reword it? Think that you're a 12-year-old who wants to ask their teacher a question without the whole class cracking up at them. So how would you reword it?
You wouldn't. You would get in trouble. Yeah.
Methane.
Methane. Oh, I think that's a fair conversation.
Beans. And we're talking about beans.
So what was the word you wanted to use instead of methane? I
was.
You wanted to use natural gas.
Natural gas with triple S.
Best bean.
Oh. Well, I
Noxious
think
is another vocabulary word
from the chat here. Federico in the chat is asking for you, Clayton, how do plagues or insects affect the crops?
It's a huge concern. So the more you provide a monoculture, the more insects will see that as just a buffet, right? An insect that specializes on eating cabbage, when they come upon a cabbage field, it's like the biggest dream they could ever have. Cabbage everywhere. In nature, of course, things are interplanted. You have good insects and bad insects, or insects that eat other insects. But when you have monocrop agriculture, which is really necessary to produce the yields that we need, outbreaks of pests are a huge concern. And historically, people relied on a lot of hand labor to control insects. And then in the 20th century, we discovered a lot of chemicals that were very effective. And so growers made use of insecticides, but those come with other costs. I think the way into the 21st century that we're going to see more and more is use of genetic technology. We've already seen adoption of genetically modified crops that express their own natural insecticides, which makes the farmer less reliant on chemicals. But like anything, if you overuse something like that too often, the insects can become resistant over time. And so we still need lots of options to be able to control pests in varied ways. So yeah, to answer that question, insect outbreaks are a big concern.
Yeah.
And if they played Farmcraft 1, they definitely dealt with that, and they probably had the same panic attacks we had playing it.
Right. Exactly. Clayton, how is the way that farmers address things like insects? How has that changed over the years?
Sure. Farmers are a lot more precise than they used to be. Back in the old days, when a lot of these agrochemicals were developed, the approach just became, well, this stuff's pretty cheap. Let's just spray every week, or let's spray on a calendar basis. But as we burn through some of those options, right, you can't operate that way for long. The insects will get resistant. You have adverse environmental consequences, and it became very clear that we had to be more precise. And so a lot of the research then shifted to develop, well, let's develop traps to see which insects are actually here. Let's understand which bugs are actually eating our crop and which bugs are not a problem at all. You know, there are actually a lot of beneficial insects out there that pollinate our crops, or beneficial insects that are predators and will eat pests. So we don't want to just go out there and indiscriminately be killing everything. We want to understand the ecology. We want to understand the biology of our fields and what's happening. So to the extent that growers now have options to monitor with traps, scientists have developed developmental models, degree day models, so that they now understand, okay, for this species, the eggs are going to hatch probably the second week of May. So there's no need to spray for the entire month before or the entire month after that. Let's target the application exactly where it's needed. So that's probably the biggest fundamental change. It's just better biological understanding of everything.
And you said they research these things. Who's doing this research?
Oh, university researchers. We're very lucky in the United States. We have a system of state land grant universities. For a long time, it's been the envy of the world, the amount of resources that we have allocated to agricultural research. And other countries are definitely catching up with us now, too. So it's not that the United States has a monopoly on this sort of knowledge anymore, not anything like that. But yes, academic researchers and their associated extension folks. Folks are not familiar with the word extension. Those are people who are trained to go out and talk to farmers and to literally extend the information to them. A lot of times, scientists, entomologists, people who study plant diseases, we're kind of nerds. We're in the lab. We might not be able to speak the language of farmers. We have extension agents that help us with that, to put the research into practice.
So that was going to be my question. I was picturing these researchers at a university, and then I was picturing your small family apple farm and wondering how in the world does that information get from the university to the small farmers? So it's through these extension services, is that right?
Yeah, and they will host events. Very often when I was a kid, I have vivid memories of going to field days at our local university laboratory and field research station, where we would see presentations on sort of the latest and best technology. Farmers, of course, also subscribe to all sorts of trade publications that are going to share research results. We attend university training sessions. Most states require by law that you have a pesticide license to be able to buy pesticides, and that requires training to renew your license on an annual basis. So there's lots of information sources that growers can go to. And of course, growers talk to one another. Sometimes the best information is, what's your neighbor doing to solve this problem, or what worked in this area that might be adaptable to my area.
That's a great point. So Federico had another question for us. In different biomes, did the amount of insects change?
Oh, absolutely. So it's good to have a little bit of perspective, right? We think of our diverse planet, right? There are 40 million different species of only beetles. Okay, the insect universe is hugely diverse. And
you say yuck, I love beetles.
Oh, man.
Not just the car or the band.
I like the car and the band.
Sorry, you derailed us with 40,000 beetles. Carry on.
40 million.
Million.
40 million.
million.
Too many.
So, like, if you had a pie chart of all the animal species on Earth, probably 75% of that would be taken up by insects. And a good number of those insects are species we just know exist but haven't identified yet. Things that live underground, things that are part of, like, all sorts of nutrient cycling. Long story short, there's tons of bugs. So depending where you are in the world, you're going to see vastly different things.
Wow. And does it change during the seasons too, I would imagine?
Oh, for sure. Even within the same crop, you'll have pests that are more of early season pests and others that don't come in until later in the year. In apples, there are all sorts of pests that we control very early before the leaves even break because they overwinter and they're going to lay eggs at that time of year. And then you have other pests like the codling moth, right? That's the stereotypical worm in the apple. That's something you manage in the middle of the summer. So yeah, there's absolutely a seasonality that varies by crop, by location, by species, by the complexity is massive.
How often is a farmer surprised?
Every day.
Oh, really?
Every
so
day.
you're going along, you plan,
in the
summer you're going to deal with winter worms, but every day there's something new.
Well, I mean, I'm being a little bit facetious there, but the point is that there's no such thing as a typical season. There are always going to be surprises. Farmers who have farmed their entire life, will every year find something that they didn't know about before, or some surprise that they've never encountered before. There really is no typical season, and there's no end to the number of things that can go wrong. And that's not to say, that's not to be doom and gloom. It's just that these are complex biological systems, and anyone who thinks they have a monopoly on all the information out there is kidding themselves. You'll always be surprised.
That makes me appreciate that produce section even more in my supermarket.
I was going to say,
I love the farmers market. Yeah.
And when you mentioned like the insect species we don't know and the amount of knowledge required, then my next question becomes, do we have any idea what we don't know? Like, do we know what we don't know, and are we trying to figure it out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of what we don't know, let's think about the problems that farmers can learn about over time. We get a sense of like what pests are going to be here year to year, but something that's really unpredictable is what the climate might look like in 20 years or in 40 years or in 50 years, right? It's possible that crops might grow in a certain area that have never grown there previously, or at least not in our recently recorded history. So I don't know if I answered your question very well there.
I'm sure it's probably one of those questions that has like too big an answer to even answer, but like, yeah, things like that, I guess, right? Knowing what the future holds is always
also knowing what customers want. That's a big question. And this is especially true for fruits and vegetables. A lot of times we think of insects and diseases will impact yield, but when you're talking about specialty crops, it's not just a matter of tonnage or a matter of production. It's a matter of an aesthetic threshold. You not only have to deliver an apple to market, you have to deliver an apple that has no surface blemishes. You have to deliver an apple that is like the right amount of redness, or the wholesaler isn't going to purchase it because customers have a very set expectation. You have to deliver an apple that has the right amount of firmness and that was picked at the optimal maturity date so that it's not too soft or too mealy, or that it's sweet enough. So there's all those sorts of factors beyond just like planting something and reaping it on a per pound basis.
Yeah, and I know that's been a factor because now we see a change in some of that, right? Where some there are services that are delivering maybe the apple that doesn't look quite as perfect as the other ones, but it's still perfectly fine and perfectly edible. So that food doesn't become just waste.
Yeah, and it's interesting though, even though those services exist, and even though people tell themselves they don't like imperfect food, or that they like imperfect food and that they're willing to buy it, it's very much human nature to still select the nicer one when you have a choice. So picture yourself going through the grocery aisle, looking at apples. You're still going to probably not pick the ugly one by design.
Right.
If all the apples are the same price, or you're paying the same price per pound, you're still going to pick through and get the nice ones. It's just how we're wired.
Yeah, and you're already listing like just a ton of challenges that farmers have to consider and face, right? Like, so it's not as simple as, because my thought when we said the word challenge was, again, similar to the thoughts we see in the chat, similar to the thoughts we're having in the conversation, things like insects, clearly a challenge, or water management is a challenge. knowing that the market wants a particular look to a piece of produce, actually, while I was aware that that was a challenge, it wasn't one that crossed my mind in the context of what we were doing here or in terms of the conversation. I don't know how you even approach that challenge.
Right. Well, and with today's consumer, that could change in a heartbeat, right?
Great point. So one of the challenges of apple production, and I'm sorry to be focusing on apples so much, it's just what I know, but it's a perennial crop. When you plant an apple orchard, you have that variety that's going to produce for 20 to 25 years, if not longer. That's a big commitment. You better make the right variety selection. You don't want to guess wrong on that. You don't want to plant a variety that next year is going to fall out of favor or is going to be over marketed because too many people planted that variety and then the price crashes. So there's those sorts of decisions that are really stressful too.
Yeah.
Yep. And then, so we're getting some questions too around genetic modification. Is it possible to modify your plants so they're more resistant to insects or immune to insects? And
Absolutely.
I would add to that also, I mean, we're watching it rain right here in Minecraft. I'm in California, which grows an awful lot of food and yet has been going through some tremendous drought. So can you modify crops to deal with climate change as well?
That's an outstanding question because it really is getting at the crux of what a lot of researchers are doing. So the first genetically modified crops were insect resistant. If you're familiar with BT corn or BT cotton, those were some of the first traits brought to market. Drought tolerance is a huge interest area. California is a great example, but like globally, we know that climate change is driving all sorts of different weather pattern changes and differences. Areas that used to get lots of rain aren't getting as much rain anymore. And just the growth of human population and the demand for the amount of food that we're going to need to produce is going to necessarily maybe force agricultural production into some areas that aren't optimal. You're going to need to be able to grow things in areas that don't get as much rain as would be ideal. So that's absolutely an area of intense research right now is drought-tolerant crops.
Not to pull you back too much there, but you said something about BT crops. What do you mean by that?
I'm sorry. So Bacillus thuringiensis is a biological insecticide. It's derived from soil bacteria. It was first commercialized in the 60s and 70s. It's actually approved for use in organic farms. And it is an insecticidal protein that can only be metabolized by insects. So it's very safe to work with. It actually needs an alkaline gut to be activated. And so insects, lepidopterans, do have an alkaline gut. Humans have a very acidic gut. So if we ingest BT, it's going to be completely inactive. It's going to pass right through us. There's no effect. This was developed as a very safe insecticide. And what scientists figured out how to do was to insert a gene for BT into the crop itself so that you don't need to spray it onto the crop, but rather you can have a crop that expresses this insecticidal protein naturally. And so BT corn was one of the first commercial developments of that technology. And it now, I would say, makes up well over half of U.S. corn acreage.
So it's naturally pest resistant?
Well, for certain pests. So BT is only going to be effective on caterpillars, or some types of BT have been designed to be effective on beetles. And so you can have multiple traits expressed in corn, but there is no BT, for example, to kill aphids or mites. So it's not as though these crops are resistant to everything, but if you can knock out the insect control for a couple of the key species, it can definitely simplify your pest management needs for the rest of the season and reduce the amount that you'll need to spray for other things potentially.
And does it kill them on contact, or does it? Do they have to?
BT has to be ingested. That's
so
right.
Eat it,
so
and then you die.
That's right, and that's why it's effective for something like corn, but maybe not necessarily for something like an apple or a vegetable, because it has to be ingested. The insect, in order to get a toxic dose, might still have to take a bite of the apple, so it's still, from an aesthetic standpoint, ruined. Whereas corn, they can eat a kernel or two of corn, and it's not going to crash your yield that much, and it's still very effective.
Although if they eat some of the corn or if they eat an apple, doesn't that produce, so yes, it's not attractive, so people might not want to eat it, but doesn't that also introduce a food safety hazard sometimes?
So BT is actually, that's a great question. we wouldn't just willy-nilly want to be genetically incorporating any insecticide. We would want to only be incorporating things that are well documented to be safe. And in the case of BT, that is something that the FDA and others have looked at exhaustively. There are no human health consequences to ingesting BT. It's very, very safe to use. And the EPA, as part of their regulation, sets a safety determination and a tolerable level that can be present in the food for it to be legal. So you have to have very precise control over the dosage when you engineer a crop like that.
One of the things you mentioned that I found interesting, and we didn't have like a very, very specific answer for it in our last season, is our pest in season 1 of Farmcraft that Brian helped do a wonderful job with his team develop. It were caterpillars. So butterflies showed up early, and then of course, as a result, we get caterpillars. Mm-hmm. We get caterpillars eating our crops. And one of the teams had the question of asking, are pesticides the only way to go? What if we wanted to utilize sort of organic practices? Mm-hmm. And I was admittedly not aware that BT as a method for pest control was considered an organic practice.
Yes, and it's actually a very common misconception that organic producers don't use pesticides. They actually are allowed to use pesticides. They're just limited to only using materials that are approved by the National Organic Program. Long story short, it can only be something that is naturally derived. We can get into the whole naturalistic fallacy, right? Just because something's mm-hmm. natural doesn't mean it's safe. But that's how the organic program works. So they do have certain products that they're allowed to use, just far fewer than what conventional growers have access to. Other things organic producers can do is rely on biological control, like releasing ladybugs into a field to eat aphids is one sort of classical example of that. Or sometimes there are naturally occurring predators or parasites that can feed on pests that if you put out supplemental food, maybe you can enhance the populations or you can take measures to conserve populations of these natural biocontrol agents. That's another very commonly practiced thing.
So Clayton, you said something about a fallacy. Are you saying that things that are natural aren't necessarily always good for us?
I think that's absolutely true. Some of the most toxic chemicals on Earth, like rotenone, are derived from plants. So the origin of a chemical has nothing to do with its toxicity. It's the actual toxicological effects that we should worry about. And another way to think of this is there is no such thing as a toxic chemical, only a toxic dose of a chemical. So okay. something like sugar, right? Sugar is not toxic in an acute way, but if you eat too much of it, you can definitely develop diabetes, which is a chronic condition. So it has a toxicity. It's just at a much higher dosage. Whereas something like ricin, right, like a biological weapon, is toxic at a very, very tiny dose, and so that's why it would be considered highly acutely toxic. But
so if I could like say this a slightly different way. Eating pizza is great. Don't eat too much pizza.
Absolutely. Too much of anything is potentially toxic.
Mm-hmm. And when you say naturally occurring, this idea of naturally occurring must be, can't necessarily be bad for you. I immediately think of things, let's say if I'm being more general, of things like, snake venom is not exactly my best friend. Though I know there are medicinal uses for snake venom, I'm not going to allow snakes to naturally bite me.
That's exactly right. And you point out the dosage, right? So right. At a certain dosage, it may be medicinal. Another classic example is warfarin. Warfarin is a chemical that is used as a blood thinner in medicine, but at super high doses, it's used as a rat poison. It's the exact same molecule, but the application methodology and the dosage makes the difference between whether it's a poison or a therapeutic medicine.
So, you know what? This brings me to an interesting point because I want to make sure we're still addressing the conversation of the challenges that farmers are facing. And of course, knowing, knowing that there's a preference by the consumer over what quote unquote chemicals go into those foods is one. But are there naturally occurring chemicals, since we're talking about naturally occurring chemicals, that they need to be aware of in things like the soil or in the plants that would cause trouble for their crop, that may affect their harvest or affect their produce?
Sure. So this depends on where you live, but certain locations have a little bit elevated levels of certain heavy metals, for example. That's something that people would want to be aware of, or naturally occurring arsenic. A lot of things like arsenic are really persistent. And to be clear, there was also agricultural use of arsenic back in the bad old days that led to accumulation in the soil as well. So it's not that it was all naturally occurring, but there are some situations where arsenic is naturally occurring, and it can persist. And sometimes you'll read news stories of arsenic showing up in rice or sweet potatoes or crops that are grown in areas where the soil levels are a little bit suboptimal. In terms of other naturally occurring, we don't need to limit the conversation to chemicals, right? So some of the biggest food safety concerns are naturally occurring pathogenic organisms, right? So if you contaminate fruits or vegetables in the harvest field with soil and then don't handle it properly, you can have concerns for outbreaks of things like listeria, for example, or other foodborne pathogens. So, the short answer to that is there's lots of naturally occurring things that can be potential safety hazards if they're not addressed.
Yeah, so it's just, I mean, again, like I feel like we're compiling a list and we haven't even scratched the surface of all of the challenges that farmers have to face. And before we leave the Minecraft world, I want to ask, are dolphins ever a problem on an inland farm? I have no idea who put these dolphins on the farm. But
I've been having to get them back into the water. You know, the news crews are there reporting on the beach, on the farmed dolphins.
It's funny. I've never heard of a situation where they'd be a pest of an inland system, but we do have aquaculture. So a lot of people might not realize that a good portion of our fish come from fish farms, especially Atlantic salmon, which are farmed in the open ocean but under cages. And it's funny, but there would be situations potentially where predators like that would have an impact on agriculture, even though it might not occur to all of us necessarily.
Yeah,
Have
and
you
the
ever heard
salmon
of
actually are
Humphrey?
a species in here, and they're in our waterways right here.
Yeah. Have you heard of Humphrey the whale? Humphrey the humpback?
I have not.
Okay, see, this is a California thing. Humphrey the humpback whale came in through the San Francisco Bay and then worked his way through the Delta, which is a network of canals and used heavily for agriculture. And Humphrey got way too far up into the Delta compared to where he should be. It was a really big thing. And we did actually have a whale swimming along through our farms around here.
So it can happen. I mean, I don't know which waterway these dolphins came through, but it could happen.
Well, I thought that the dolphins were in there for the, wait a minute, aquaponic farm? Is that right?
Oh, hydroponic.
No, hydroponic.
Yeah, so hydroponic farms.
Because of my theme.
Farmer Clayton, could you talk about that a little bit?
Hydroponic farming, sure. So that is a system in which soil isn't used. You have systems where you have some sort of inorganic or sanitized growth medium, and you filter water with nutrients through that system. So think about indoor greenhouse production. That's maybe one of the most common uses of it in commercial agriculture, where they can grow things like lettuce and leafy greens indoors without soil. One of the key advantages, of course, is you have a lot more control over temperature and moisture and water content and nutrients than you do outdoors. But it's very expensive in terms of getting that infrastructure set up. And there can be specific challenges to pest control indoors. You have to have proper air circulation and humidity control and things like that.
So if I could make that just a little bit simpler, what you're saying is you grow things indoors without soil. You don't plant it in the ground. You're basically just having it sit in water, a special solution of water. Is that correct?
In water or in some sort of sterile growth medium that water can flow over. So think of like peat moss or like sand. Plants can still put the roots into sand, even though there's no soil organic material there, if you're flowing water through it, and water with nutrients added.
When it comes to like climate and protecting the climate for the future, what are some of the practices now that aren't so great for the climate, and some of the changes that they're trying to make that when it comes to like large scale worldwide farming,
Sure.
what are the things that could improve the climate impact of farming?
Great question. Well, that fundamentally comes down to the same carbon balance question that we have in any industry. Farmers have emissions, and farmers also capture carbon. So growers of crops, especially of large crops that produce a lot of biomass, are pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. But anytime they till the ground, we're going to release greenhouse gases. Of course, animal agriculture is going to have emissions because you're converting plant energy into meat, but there's byproducts like CO2 and methane from the animals. And so it's a balance sheet. And so there are practices that farmers can do. Certainly anything that precludes the need to till is a good practice. So no-till agriculture, where you can plant crops into an untilled field, that's definitely good for emissions, but that comes with complications, right? So because when you plant into a no-till situation, you have a different set of pest problems. And tillage can sometimes help you to control populations of soil-borne pests, so there's complications there. Other things that can be done to help prevent exorbitant carbon loss, like cover crops is another one, right? So cover crops is a soil conservation tool, but it's also helping to potentially draw atmospheric carbon down as well. So a cover crop, for those who don't know, is a crop that you don't actually harvest, but it's done prior to planting or in between crops as a soil conservation mechanism.
Wait, you putting stuff in the ground that you're not going to eat or feed to somebody? What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So think of a field we have here. Rather than leaving that as bare soil over the entire winter, you might plant winter barley or wheat or something, and have a greenscape that over the winter, then you would plant the next spring, you would plant a crop into that.
So you're saying that there are some crops. Sorry. So you're just saying that you can plant some crops in the winter that grow. I'm from Michigan. Nothing grows in the winter, or at least not that I ever saw. So you can put some things in the ground, not your corn or your rutabaga or your zucchini. Mm-hmm. But why are you doing that? Why are you growing something else there?
So there can be nutrient benefits. For example, if you're going to plant a cover crop that's a legume, you're going to fix some nitrogen, and it provides some natural fertilization that then the following spring you're going to plant into crops and not need to use as much synthetic fertilizer. And when I say winter crop, I don't necessarily mean that you're planting in the winter. It could be something that you plant the previous fall that will then begin to emerge, and then the snow will cover it up. But then by the time the snow melts and spring starts to get warm the next year, that crop's going to be up and sort of ahead of something that you would plant in the spring.
Wow.
Some of the ways of applying fertilizer. How do farmers apply fertilizer?
Sure. So a lot of it is synthetic fertilizer that they're going to purchase, and they're going to apply it using machinery that would broadcast it. Or for certain crops, you're going to maybe only want to band it under a certain, like the tree line, for example. You're not going to want to broadcast it over the entire field because you want to target where it reaches into the soil. Mm-hmm. And fertilizer can be applied by air. You can also apply manure. Animal manure is a natural fertilizer that's useful in some crops. So in some areas of the country where there's a lot of poultry houses, corn and soybean and wheat growers will be able to get free poultry manure because it's a waste product that's a disposal problem for the poultry producers, but it's a nice sort of value-added natural fertilizer source for farmers. So if you have access to those materials, it can sometimes decrease the need to buy synthetic fertilizer.
Okay, and synthetic fertilizer could be in the form of can it be a liquid form and a solid granule form?
Yeah, liquids, granules. There's different blends of nutrients. N, P, and K are the letters that are most thrown around. That refers to nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And then there can also be other trace minerals that you like. Some crops you want to get calcium levels up, or you can have deficiencies in other minerals like magnesium or boron or things like that.
Cool.
I have learned
Man,
so
we
much.
could do this
in
all
the
day.
I was going to
last
say, we'll be
Like-
stuck here. I'm looking at the
Oh,
time. I was like,
like,
I'm not
darn.
done with questions yet.
Yeah, like,
I know
all right.
exactly, and I'm looking at the clock. Like we're coming up to the top of the hour. I can't believe how quickly.
One
this
last
has
comment
gone.
I'll make on fertilization.
Please.
It's not as simple as adding as much fertilizer as you can, because there can be a such thing as too much fertilizer, especially for crops where you're growing a fruit or a vegetable. You don't want to put down so much fertilizer that the crop just grows a bunch of leaves and stems, right? You're not making any money off the vegetation. You're making the money off the fruit. And over-fertilization also has negative environmental consequences. If you get runoff events, you get algal blooms in bodies of water, and farmers certainly don't want to spend any more than they have to. So it's in their interest to be efficient and target just what the crop needs, and not any more.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. So much info. Woof. So we are so thankful, Clayton, that you have spent your time with us this hour and shared so much knowledge. Fantastic to have you here. And we are, as we've said, we are heading into preseason challenge number 1. And I'm going to go ahead and switch us so you can see all of our, oh, don't want that.
I was on mute. I was trying to say we should have Farmer Clayton back.
We should, yes.
I'm going to try. I'm trying to turn my camera back on. It's been glitchy today. We'll see.
I know those technology glitches. We all have those. Everyone can relate to tech glitches. So again, preseason challenge number 1 is chat with a farmer, and you are going to design a modern farm in your Minecraft world to model and demonstrate these tools and practices. So we have just spent an hour talking about some of the tools and practices that farmers are using today. And you might want to try to think of some others and do some research. And so when you go to the NASEF website and you go to the Farmcraft page, you're going to have our guide again, which has some questions that you could think of. And then, as we all just did, you're going to come up with some on your own, and you can go ahead and share those too.
You know what we call technology glitches?
Oh, yeah.
Bugs.
Opportunity.
Boy.
I did there.
Unfortunately, we
what you
don't
did
have an
there.
insecticide for technology.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So thank you. Eric has just pulled up the NASEF page. And then we did have a question about submitting Flipgrid. So I'm glad you pulled this one up.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there are a few ways, obviously, to submit. If you're using school-based emails, that's a Gmail account for those Google schools that are using Google Classroom, or the Microsoft accounts that you have through your regular one because you already had licenses. The email that was sent with the link should have also included a password to the page. So I want to make sure that you have that. If not, of course, feel free to email. And Claire, what is the email they should email if they have that?
I'm going to drop it in the chat right now, but it's info@nasef.org. There we go. All right.
Okay, so there are several ways, obviously, to get in. One of those ways is through a guest password. And I realize now, actually, I'm looking at it, and I don't believe the guest password was turned on for that topic. So that may be the issue right there. So I will create that, and I will send that to Claire, and we'll make sure to get that out to everyone today.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric. All right. And then, so again, if you want to sign up for Farmcraft, then you just go to this page, and the link is in the chat. It's on the learning menu under Farmcraft. And remember that if you're signing up and you don't have Minecraft Education Edition, we are more than happy to provide it free to all the students who are participating in the challenge. We don't want anyone to be limited from joining. And we also have a few other Minecraft events going on. Eric, you want to just mention those real quick?
Absolutely, since I got it open. If we go up to Compete at the top of our page and we go to Minecraft Events, you will see Farmcraft. And of course, we've got our ongoing right now Rube Goldberg competition and our Rube Goldberg machine contest, where you have to eliminate a book, open and eliminate a book. And of course, the Junior Solar Sprint, which has been a really exciting and fun one, learning about solar vehicles and creating one in a Minecraft world.
Perfect. Awesome. And again, just like the others, these are all free. And we do offer the Minecraft licenses to participate in any. So we are so excited to have you all here. Farmcraft is officially kicked off, and we're looking forward to seeing, woohoo, we're looking forward to seeing what you have to share with us. And there we go. We lost Eric for a second there. Now you're back. We look forward to seeing the Flipgrid videos, and we will be here again with another live stream coming up very shortly, March 2nd. So watch for preseason challenge number 2 will be revealed at that time. And again, as we said before, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us, info@nasef.org. We are human beings that answer that email. So if you have a question, we will find the answer and take care of you. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining us.